Over the years, I've tried a lot of different rifle setups, and I've used a lot of different accessories in that process. And I've come to find that not everything is as valuable or necessary as you might perceive upon initial purchase. So I wanted to make this video about 5 AR-15 accessories you probably won't need that I fell for. When I say I fell for them, I'm not saying that these are bad products or they don't provide value or they're not of high quality. It's just that I don't think I need them as much as I thought I did based on either marketing or hearsay. So the first thing on this list, and real quick just to let you know, none of those items are on this rifle. I still own some of these items, and if they don't hinder the use of the weapon system in any way, I might leave them on the gun, but I don't add them any longer, and so I'm using this rifle as an example of me not using them at all. So, and if you're interested in this rifle, I'll leave a link down in the pinned comment as well as in the description so you can see all the different parts and everything we have going on here. The first item is going to be the kill flash, or the ARD, anti-reflection device, right? So what is that for? A kill flash is going on the front of your scope or your optic, whether or not it's a red dot or a prism, and the idea is that it eliminates sun glint. So if you're looking across a mountain and the sun is shining at you, and someone else is looking for you, there's a chance the sun could hit the front lens of your optic, which would then make a glare, which someone could see and potentially then engage you from. And that is a potential issue that you should be considering. However, first you have to use this equation, which I am inventing right now off the top of my head. What's the likelihood that you'll be in a situation where you'll use your rifle defensively? And then add, what's the likelihood that you'll be in a situation where you're using your rifle defensively at long range, where something like scope glint could be a real issue. And then add in, what's the likelihood of that scope glint actually being the problem that gets you eliminated in that scenario. And so yes, they are useful in the sense that they actually do accomplish the goal of getting rid of that reflection. However, the likelihood of needing that as a prepared citizen is extremely low, and the likelihood of it being the difference that's made if you actually find yourself in a situation where it would have been required is also very low. So I think they're useful, but they can be very expensive, especially for certain optics. When you start getting things from Tenebrex or from some of these other companies, they get really high up there, 60 bucks, 80 bucks. And of course you can get good ones from companies like 100 Concepts, which are more affordable, but you're still spending money on something that you probably just honestly won't need. And the other thing to keep in mind is that once you add an ARD or a kill flash on the front of your optic, you're going to hurt the light transmission through the optic. And it does hurt optical clarity overall. I don't care what anybody says, it makes it harder to see through, especially in low light conditions. So you're also hindering your ability to use the optic at all. So that's why ARDs and kill flashes are number one on this list. Now, next on this list is going to be in a similar category, and that's going to be light caps. So light caps go on your weapon mounted light in order to avoid the same exact thing as what a kill flash and an ARD does. It gets rid of the glare or the glint from the sun or any other light source reflecting off of the reflector inside of your lamp head. And of course, yes, that could be a big issue. If you're at night, hiding out, trying not to be seen, but maybe you're using your rifle as a way to PID a potential threat or something like that, and the light is then shined upon by another light source, it could easily be seen. And so that is a consideration you should make, especially if you think you might find yourself in that scenario. However, like I said, if we use that previous equation, the likelihood of it being needed is pretty low for the average prepared citizen, and it's very easy to make one in a makeshift manner. I mean, you could easily accomplish the goal using something like a piece of tape. You could accomplish the goal by using something along the lines of a cheap scope cap that came with one of your cheaper red dot sights or something along those lines. Like, there's a lot of ways around that problem without having to spend the money on a dedicated light cap. And in all honesty, I think they're good to have, and they do what they're supposed to do, but it is extra money spent, and you probably won't need it. So that's why it's number 2 on the list. And you can see that, yes, that could be problematic if there's light shining right inside of this lamp head. It will give away your position, but like we said, likelihood, right? So number 3 on this list is going to be folding stock adapters. Now, I've ran a folding stock adapter for a long time. It was a Sylvan Arms. I recently was running their Gen 5, which was an all steel folding stock adapter, which is very robust and much more along the lines of the Law tactical folding system, and it was really nice. I mean, there was no issues I had with it at all. It performed exactly as advertised. It was very durable, and it did exactly what it was advertised to do. But the amount of times, and I know we're not going through like an SHTF scenario right now. We're not going through some kind of cataclysmic event, so we might not be able to actually tell if we need these things until that time comes. I get it. I've worked through that mindset myself many, many times. The issue is that I haven't ever needed it personally. It still doesn't get the gun small enough to fit inside of a typical backpack. So even if you're running an 11.5 or a 10.3 barrel length AR-15, I mean, you're still carrying a rifle and it's still hard to fit inside of any smaller bag. So it either requires a specialty bag or a much larger bag. And at that point in time, the amount of space you're saving from having that folding stock isn't really that much more than just having the stock fully collapsed. And yes, there's the vehicle aspect. Well, it's easier to get in and out of vehicles with, it's less space, it takes up less volume, all those things. I agree, but you also can't shoot the gun with the stock folded because AR-15s just don't work that way. And so you're still going to have to unfold it to shoot it if you actually need it in that scenario. So yes, there are uses for a folding stock. And yes, there are good ones on the market that do a very good job and work exactly as advertised. And I don't have any problems with those products. But they are expensive. For a good one, you're going to spend quite a bit of money, upwards around $200, right? And sometimes more. And in that scenario, how often are you going to use that and how often is it going to actually help you? Now, the other part of that question you have to ask yourself is it also worth the additional weight? Because it does add a significant amount of weight to the gun. And is it worth the amount of complexity you're adding to your system? Because now you have to have a buffer installed into the back of your bolt carrier group, basically, that then interacts with your buffer in order to still cycle the weapon properly, because now there's this extension on your receiver extension. So it's stacking tolerances, it's adding complexity, it has proprietary parts, and it's not something you can use while folded. It adds weight. There's a lot of compromises involved with getting a folding stock adapter that don't really, well, do a whole lot for you, especially as a prepared citizen. So I think they're a lot of money. I think they work for how they're supposed to, but I don't think you're going to need it, really, in all honesty. I mean, you might, depending on your situation, but these are the things that I personally have found that I don't need or don't actually accomplish the task that I thought they might when I originally purchased them. So let's move on to number 4, okay? What's number 4 on this list? Number 4, and I'm just getting close to the camera because sometimes I like to be a freak. Number 4 is going to be, well, a suppressor cover. Yes, they do exactly what they're supposed to do. They protect your leg from being burnt by your suppressor, and they also protect anything else that it might interact with when it's very hot. And that is useful, and that does definitely add some provided protection, right? And it can, in some circumstances, be required if what you're doing is long-range shooting, and you want to avoid having heat mirage, so you have to put a suppressor cover on so that that mirage doesn't show up as quickly, and that's a reasonable reason for why you might need one. But I got suppressor covers for the basic reason of, not wanting to burn myself and assuming that it would just be safer, right? The problem is that for a good one, it's going to cost you at least, close to $100, at least in my opinion. And even then, once you get up to that price point, your suppressor cover is going to do a couple of things. One, it's going to smell really bad whenever you're getting the gun super hot. I mean, it's just part of the deal. It's not that big of a deal, but it is something to consider when you're worried about maintaining some level of signature reduction. You're also now adding the thing that's specifically made for signature reduction, a element of smell that it didn't have before. So that's one consideration. And then another consideration is that once they get hot enough, unless they have some way of wrapping around the front of your handguard or the front of your front sight post or something like that, they generally try to work their way off the suppressor. And almost everyone I've owned and worked with has eventually came off of my suppressor once things get very hot. And the ironic part of that is that when things are very hot is when you need the suppressor cover the most. The other consideration is that with a suppressor cover on, it takes longer for your suppressor to cool off than it would without it. Because with it on, you're basically insulating that heat inside of the suppressor and it has nowhere to escape, rather than allowing the surface area of the external parts of the suppressor to allow heat to escape. So there's a lot of drawbacks to using a cover. And I think the most obvious one you might find when you first buy one is weight, because it's usually, good covers can weigh as little as 3 or 4 ounces, Most of them weigh between like 5 and 6, at least the ones I've used. And that's still a lot of additional weight on the end of your gun, at the end of your barrel, where it's harder to maintain control of the weapon. And that extra 4 ounces, let's just say, is, if you want to make it sound worse, a quarter pound. So you're strapping a quarter pound onto the very end of your rifle that already has a, 11 or 14 ounce suppressor strapped to it, just to make it way more, I guess, right? So look, I've used suppressor covers. I think they have benefits, of course, especially with the mitigation of mirage for long range shooting. And they also are good for protecting your equipment and your legs and everything else with not wanting to burn things that you don't want to have burnt. But they have a lot of drawbacks. They cost a lot of money, for good ones at least, and they still have a lot of faults. So I just don't think you really need them. I think they're good for certain tasks, but in general, as someone who just wants to have a rifle to be prepared, I'm not finding them overly necessary anymore. So what's number 5 on the list? Number 5 on the list is going to be barricade stops. Now, I have a barricade stop still. It's not on any of my guns. I just have it in my parts bin. We're getting close again. Oh my gosh, what are we doing right now? And here's the thing. Barricade stops are, well, exactly how they sound. They're made for barricades. Not everything is a barricade. Now, I know it's supposed to be a universal term, but in my experience, the barricade stops that I've used were specifically made for like what you would use at the shooting range, like a VTAC barrier, like a barricade, where it has a right angle square geometry to it, where that flat barricade stop can be pushed up right into it just in the right form factor to get a ton of purchase and get some really good leverage on the gun. And for that purpose, they work very well. The issue is that not everything is a barricade. Not everything is shaped that way, and they don't interact with organic shaped things very well at all. And so what you do is you add this thing onto near the end of your handguard, where you're planning on using it to force it into barriers and cover that you can shoot from and get that additional leverage with that barricade stop in order to have very accurate shots, which if you find the exact right setup for that, it works very well. But my problem is that I've tried to use it for other things. Like, for example, I have those blue 55-gallon drums here on the range. They're round. That flat barrier stop just wants to slide off in either direction around that round surface because, well, it's round. So you're having this tiny bit of surface area from the actual barricade being pushed against the barricade stop, and it's actually hurting my ability to maintain stability with the weapon at that point in time. Now, in general, I would just rest the top of my handguard on top of that barrel and have less leverage, but not have that particular issue, let's just say. And this is just an example. I mean, you could apply this to the hood of a car. You could apply this to anything like a giant rock, anything that's not square and perfectly shaped for shooting at the shooting range. And the other thing is that, okay, so this round thing is something I'm not going to be able to use my barricade stop for, so now I'm going to set my handguard on top of it. Great, well now this pointy little barricade stop that you have at the very tip of your handguard is sitting on top of the barrel before anything else is touching it, and now you're trying to balance the rifle on this tiny, tiny little top that is, well, not very stable and doesn't really give you any leverage. In fact, you find yourself having to fight against it in order to have stability. So that's why I don't think barricade stops are necessarily worth it. I think a vertical foregrip can work as a barricade stop very well while having a lot of additional capabilities that you don't get from a barricade stop on its own. And I think from a new shooter's perspective, or somebody who just hasn't gone out and actually like pushed their rifles up onto organic surfaces that aren't just specifically made for shooting off of at the range, I think it sounds like a great idea in theory. And I think on paper, it makes a lot of sense. But the more I've used them, the more I realize not only do you probably not need them, but they also have negative drawbacks. Like, for example, being a potential snag hazard. And now you have the snag hazard that's actually catching on gear and catching on slings or straps or anything else. And that can actually make things even worse than just not having it at all. So that's my list of 5 things that I don't have on this gun. And it's for those reasons that I don't have them on this gun. They're just 5 things I don't think you're going to need, that sound great, that sound like you might need them, that sound like they're worth the money. And at the end of the day, at least in my experience, they just probably weren't. And I mean, I've spent at least $200 on ARDs or kill flashes. I've spent at least $40 on light caps. I've spent at least $150 on a folding stock adapter, right? Like, there's so many things I've spent a lot of money on that I just realized over time I didn't really need. And so I'm sharing that with you to try to help you, not necessarily tell you what you should or shouldn't get, because some of these things you might decide you need or are right for your purpose, right? If you're building a long range SPR type AR-15 that's meant to reach out at distance, then maybe a kill flash makes more sense in that scenario, right? I'm not telling you shouldn't get these things. What I'm telling you is that they're things that I've realized might not be worth as much as you assume they are. And if you're going to get them, just verify that it's exactly what you need or if it makes sense for what you're doing. And in my circumstances, I've realized that I just don't think I need them, right? So if you have any questions about this, please leave them in the comments below. And at the same time, tell me about other things that you got that you thought you needed that you just ended up not needing. Because I think there's a lot of that happens here in the firearms community. And it's just part of the deal, right? Unless you try things out, unless you use them, it's really hard to tell what you do or don't need. And that's been my goal. I try to get out and actually shoot these guns and actually run these accessories and find out what they're all about, and then report back to you my honest personal experiences and findings, which sometimes I'm wrong because I'm not a professional. I don't have the round count that some of these other very good channels have, and I'm just giving you my personal experience in the best way that I can. So if you find it helpful or useful, make sure you hit the subscribe button and hit the like button because it will help the channel grow, and it also just shows that you're willing to support what I'm doing here, which I greatly appreciate. You can go to magicprepper.com. There's a bunch of information there, including stuff related to what we're talking about right now that you might find interesting. So check that out. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.